welcome to the sculpting class session number 4. Today we will start our big main project, and for today we specifically concern ourselves with the blockouts. And ta-da! Like I said, we start the main challenge, and for this main challenge you can pick one of these two concepts, either I called her the mage or the wizard. And both of these concepts are from Pupa 24, aka Violetta. I found her concepts on ArtStation and I thought they would be a great fit for our class and give us the right amount of challenge for this purpose, for our characters. And I just want to give you a heads up. I got the permission from the artist to use these concepts for our class, and she gave us her blessing and wishes us lots of fun with these concepts. However, I also promised her to notify you when you, at the end, might post your progress on social media or in your portfolio. We should give credit to the rightful owner of these concepts, which is Pavlovskaia, and I also put in the ArtStation link to this specific artwork right here. And for our big project, I talked about it before, but we won't go through the full pipeline. We will concern ourselves mostly with the sculpture part, and then we will also do poly paint for this project. This time it's mandatory, and then in the end we will do a pose and render. So we would go through these steps together to give you guys in the end a nice polished piece that you can actually put into your portfolio. Yes, about the mic situation. I hope you can hear me all right still. It is a different mic than usual because I was traveling and they lost my luggage on the way and my microphone was in the luggage. But I hope it's still working fine. They will send the luggage at some point tomorrow, hopefully. But yeah, sorry for the less good audio quality. Let's see. Can someone give me a sign if it's okay? As long as you can hear me, that's fine. Okay. Then, as I said, we will start the blockout today. For this, we need to learn how to set up references in ZBrush, and I'll also give you some hints and pointers about the anatomy of these guys. Alright, regarding the references, I sent in the turnaround sheets that Puba also created for this project in the presentations chat, so you will find both the turnaround sheet for the mage and for the wizard. And like I said, you don't have to do both of them, you can pick one. Generally, like scope-wise, last year, just to inform you, they needed to do 2 characters in the same amount of time as you now have for 1 character. So this time I will pay close attention to like how polished and refined the character is in the end. And I also can talk about the difficulty of these both. The male character appears to be a bit more difficult if you want to go for a slight increased challenge. However, I want you guys to also, when you pick the concept that you prefer to do, pay attention to the hairstyle of the mage, of the female character, because that one can also be a bit more complex. So even though the clothing is a bit more easier on the female character, the hair is more complicated, and on the other hand, here the mage has a bit more going on with the clothing. However, the hair can be a bit easier than the heads of the woman. Then, regarding the blockout, we will do the same approach that we chose for the Pokemon. You might ask, why is that so? And this, like from these 3 approaches that we could take to start this project, the primitives serve our purpose the best, because these concepts are stylized characters. They live from very clean, nice shapes that flow into each other. So we really want to keep this underlying shape of anatomy, and then the clothing also needs to be nice and polished. And the other two options that we actually would have, and that you might hear about when you look at how to start a character, are Z-spheres and starting from a base mesh. I haven't talked lots about Z-spheres, especially because we won't need this type of block out method for our project here. Just to give you an overview, what you do with Z-spheres is you kind of create a small skeleton, so to say, where you have spheres and cylinders and spheres, and you can kind of bring this Z-sphere rig in a position that you like, and then you turn these kind of spheres and cylinders into one merged mesh, as if you would make a dynamesh, and then you have some sort of base to start from. However, these you don't have like so much control about the exact shapes, and it's hard to do. For example, if you have a calf, like the bottom part of the leg, and it's shaped like you have different muscles and all that. If you start with Z-spheres, we would only get a cylinder. And if we start, on the other hand, with primitives, we get to choose, for example, to make one long cylinder for the bone and then attach another sphere for the muscles that are there. So we have more control over the general forms. So this is what makes primitives great. And then on the other hand, if we would use a base mesh, most of them come in some sort of pre-made, like each base mesh is already in a certain style. Especially if we go with the realistic ones, we kind of have the opposite effect. We have too much detail, and if we want to create the more simpler shapes from the references, we would actually put more times onto our shoulders, more workload, because we would need to get rid of all the details and then create the smooth parts. And this is why we start with primitives for this project. So for today, your task is to pick a concept, one of these two. Then you set up your references, just as I will be showing you next. And then you block out the shapes of your character's body and hair using primitives. And then I want you to pay attention to get your character's block out as close as possible to the references. And then while you're doing so, keep proportions and shapes in mind. But the goal, just to recap that one more time, the goal is to get as close as possible to the reference and not to create our own interpretation of the design. Because this is the skill that is really important in the industry. If you get a concept from concept artists, they put all the effort into designing the shapes, the nuances, and the forms, and how the forms are blending into each other. And we as character artists are then in the shoes of simply creating a 3D version of that very exact concept art. So this is why we need to stay as close as possible to the reference to train this skill. And then your homework will be to finish the block out and upload images from it combined to a single image until next week at 8 p.m. Alright, that's it. Let's dive into ZBrush. Before we do that, I will quickly send in the cheat sheet for the references, as I haven't done that yet. And then we will talk about the references. Stream is running. Yes, I forgot the note. I also wanted to applaud you guys for uploading your assignments. There were many very cool projects in there, so I'm happy to to talk to you about your Pokemon after we go to the breakout rooms. But yeah, good job on that. I was very happy to see all these cute Pokemon. If I just as a heads up, because maybe more of you have had the same questions. When I say I want to have, when you did the poly paint and you have to upload images of the gray version and the colored version, there's no need to also upload the colored ZTL tool and the gray ZTL tool, because I can also in my program simply hit on the button to hide all the poly paint. So it's sufficient to upload just one file that also has the poly paint, and I can then hide it myself if I want to look at the gray version. Then this is kind of the last call to remind you that I strongly prefer PNG files or JPEG files over PDFs, because this one is just longer to set up and bring into my overview file so that I can give you guys feedback. So please just use an image. It might also be faster for you than to convert it to a PDF. And one more thing, just a reminder for everyone, is that these homeworks are mandatory since we are doing a portfolio examination. Each of these weekly assignments are important. So the homework is not just for fun, but it's actually important that you upload the homework. And for me, it's better if you upload anything, even though if you haven't finished the task completely, than if you upload nothing at all. So just as a reminder for those that haven't uploaded anything, it's better to upload at least what you have, even though if it's not finished. Alright, then as usual, we start with the Dynamesh sphere. There we go. And I already told you with the Pokemon project that we keep the sphere as kind of a size reference since it's about 2 meters in size, and at the bottom is kind of on the ground. If we would import it to other projects, so I would just use another sphere. If I start blocking out, then I will keep this one in my scene center. So now there are different ways to set up your references in ZBrush. However, there's one that I prefer over most of them. So we will use these actual grids that we see here to bring our references into a position on screen. So right now this grid is hidden or shown if we press on this floor button, and you might have noticed that on the floor button there are 2 more buttons called X, Y, and Z, and currently only the Y is on, and I can hit X and Z, and then I will get 2 more grids, and we need them to be active in order to put our references there. Alright, and then I told you in the first lesson that you can double click these arrows to expand or minimize your UI, because we will do lots of clicking in this draw tab. I will open my sidebar and then pin this draw tab to my UI. So I just go to this white circle that you see here, and I will just drag it here. This way I have this draw UI here, and when I click on it, it won't disappear. And if I would want to get rid of it, I can just hit this circle again. Okay, so here we have tons of options. One of them that we also have in our menu here is the perspective button. So we see this bit with the distortion of the grid. When I toggle this button, we don't have perspective on. Very important, and the shortcut for it is P. Since we're switching between perspectives a lot during references, when we're using references, the shortcut might be useful to remember. Then camera-wise, for a full body character, we like both of these are fine. I think the focal length of 85 is just a bit better. And then here we also have the floor button one more time, and we will go here in this floor menu to front and back. So if we click on this button, we get here one slot. This is where we will upload our reference. So we click on this button, hit import, and then I quickly need to find the references. So, alright, when I click this button, I get the turnaround sheet of my character here on my background. As you can see, we have this slight transparency, which is great if we want to trace and bring the sphere into position for our blockout. However, you see that currently the character that's facing front is not in the center of the page, which is because I have this rectangular view and all of these poses are on the same sheet. Sorry. So what we will do here is we could actually. We could use the horizontal offset, and this one with the horizontal and vertical offset, we can tweak the position of our reference. However, this character is also a bit too big, since we're aiming to get the reference as close as possible to this 2-meter scale. So what we'll do here is we have a grid size. This one will determine the reference size of the left one and the right one at the same time. So if I will first use this overall grid size slider to give the character the overall proportion that I need. And for this one, you can see we need to turn off perspective to work more accurately, so that the scale, that the sphere is always in the same position on the reference. Otherwise, if we have perspective on, we get inaccurate results. You see that the camera is kind of moving, and it's hard to align the sphere to the reference. So for this step, whenever we want to align our character to the reference, we need to toggle off perspective for it to be accurate. Okay, now we can see we need to make the grid size a bit smaller too. Maybe this is fine. There we go. And then, as you saw before, the character is here to the left, so with the horizontal offset, I can bring it into position. This is one option if you're kind of lazy and have this big as reference and you simply want to align it or adjust the position a tiny bit. However, more convenient is, and I will send these files in the presentation chat too in a second, to do some work beforehand and crop these images. We'll just see in a second what I did here. Sorry, spots. To do the work beforehand and just put one of these characters in the center of an image. So if I now get rid of this horizontal offset, put it to 0, vertical offset, put it to 0, you see that the character is automatically in the center of my scene, so I don't need to adjust it. And in Photoshop, I also have the axis in the middle so that I can check better for if the character is actually in the center or not. So here we need to adjust the grid size. This looks fine, and I actually don't think we would need to adjust the vertical offset. This looks kind of nicely here. Okay, so we have the front side set up now, and now we also need to do the side. So what we can do here is we go to left and right, and here we have this map 1 slot 2. We can import image, and here as well I have uploaded, I have cropped the turnaround sheet to have just this image, and here it's looking in the wrong direction because we want the character to be facing here to the front, so we can just flip the character. There we have it, and this is everything we kind of the most important steps to set up our character. Then one more nice thing to know are these P lines. So right now, when I have my cursor on the sphere, you see that it generates this blue line and the orange line, and these are pointing on the reference. So this can be helpful if you want to sculpt something in the 3D space, and while you're not in the front or side view, want to check if this point on the mesh is aligned with the position of your reference. However, I find it more annoying to have this line here, and luckily we can also hide this line so that it's not on. And this one's called the P line, the project edit line. So we can click on it here for the left and right tab, and if we click on the front and back, we also need to hide it here, so now we have these lines hidden. And one more explanation as to why I'm choosing to adjust the grid size over this scale button is because these characters, they have been on a turnaround sheet and perfectly aligned, so they are the same size. And if I adjust the scale here, this one would only affect the front side, and then I would need to do the same amount of scaling in this reference too, so it's just easier to scale both of them at the same time here over the grid size, because I know they have the same size. So it's just yeah, and the reason why we don't use the scale slider. Alright, then here we have something like the opacity, the general opacity of the reference, and we also have these fill modes. So if I switch through them, then we can see this one makes our reference visible, but the mesh itself is kind of on top of our reference. And this one is the same, but the reference is slightly less opaque. But I think for our purposes, the fill mode number 3 is just fine. So we want to have this projection on our mesh so we can see when our mesh is too big. And then here with the project on mesh, we can also get this effect where we, instead of this kind of transparency Fresnel effect, that we have the outlines of our character kind of projected onto the sphere. But me personally, I prefer to just work in this view. Let's see if I missed something. Alright, I think it's, yeah, not too complicated actually. So what we can do now is just begin blocking out our character. As I said, I will leave the sphere here in the center, and then I will append the sphere, and this one will be my head. Just want to do that here. This one. Okay. So now we can block out our character. It's also important to have the character in the scene center and not start modeling your character like somewhere here, because we want to use symmetry as long as possible. And you will notice in the process of this block out that this character is also slightly asymmetrical, but that's fine. We'll just try to align it as close as possible to the reference, but keep the symmetry for this project as long as possible. So in this case, it's more important to keep the symmetry than to align the lines perfectly to the mesh. Okay, so for the head, it kind of consists out of 2 spheres, so to say, in this case. So I could go here and duplicate my sphere, but since I know it all belongs to the head, and I know I can use polygroups, I will just create a duplicate of this sphere within the same subtool so I have a better overview. So by control and clicking on the arrow, I can just duplicate the sphere that I have, and then by clicking Alt and on this one I can scale my head. And it's also important that we look at the side view too, so that we can that our character is in the right position here as well. Let's go over here. Alright, this is at first a very rough lookout. So regarding the polygroups, right now when we duplicate the mesh like this, we have both of them in the same polygroup, and I can use the Alter Groups button up here. Hard to see, but these are 2 different shades of red. And then we can use the method that we learned last time with Control, Shift, and the Select Rectangle tool. Click on one polygroup and it hides the other one. Then we can drag a mask to make one polygroup mask. Control, Shift, and click to bring it back. So 3 steps. Control, Shift, and click on one of the polygroups, mask off everything, and then Control, Shift, and click to bring it back. So this way I can just manipulate one of the spheres, even though they are in the same subtool, instead of, yeah, this just makes it faster. Okay, and we can use all sorts of tools that we need to activate symmetry, by the way. So now got this guy up here, activate symmetry. And now we can use all the tools that we learned before. So I can also, for example, use the knife lasso to cut away this part and these kind of things. And while doing the blockout, it is also important that you check your references from like your sculpt from multiple angles all the time, because it gets really tempting to just stay in the front view and make everything look perfect from the front view, but then you turn to the side and everything is kind of slanted, not working right. So yeah. And another important thing with block out is we want to first block out the entire character before we get lost in the details. We want to see the overall scope and have everything in 3D so we can look at the body in total before we start concerning ourselves with like putting in the nose and all the eyebrows and then all of this kind of thing. So we want to get the big shapes in first, and this is a general rule that applies to all characters that you create. So you first want to do a block out of everything in general before you do um, the details. Yes. Okay. So for this hat, I mean, we can start here, but for this hat I have a small idea. I can use the deformer from the Gizmo tab, because right now the shape fits kind of, yes, but it has this increased volume here in the top. So to match the shape a bit better, I can use here on the gear icon the deformer. I could also use probably the taper, maybe that one's easier. So what the taper does, like if I click on this taper modifier, is I get this small box, and all of these are my manipulators. So if I just drag and drag this kind of arrow, I mean, you can see the effect pretty clearly here. So I can use this one to get this slight bend. And then what I need to do is hit accept afterwards. You can see when you have a modify not applied, you can see that by this orange gear icon. So I can go here, hit accept, and then I have just very quickly, very easily, this more tapered head. And it seems to fit also from this view too. Alright, so for the body, we will also use a big sphere. Click on it, activate symmetry. Oops. Scale it, bring it into position, scale it this way, scale it that way. And when doing these blockouts, we can't solely rely on the move tools and the gizmos. There will be shapes like the body where we also need to use, for example, the move brush. And for this one, we want to do big shapes, like use the move brush with the big brush size to kind of align it here. One more thing that we need to keep in mind when modeling the chest is that we will be adding, like we will do the body, like the real body first, and then we will do some extracting to get the clothing. But the clothing will also get some thickness, so we need to model the body slightly slimmer than what the reference is showing, because we know we'll be extracting clothing on top. But yeah, we model the entire body first, even if it's hidden by clothing. Okay. Here it's a bit of guessing work where the body of the image is. It's fine. Sphere. So the process of blocking out is kind of similar to blocking out the Pokemon. So nothing too new. It's just that the shapes become more complex. But I'm sure you will manage that just fine. Choose maybe a cylinder for the base. So just a repetition of these steps, bringing some primitives and rotating and blocking them out. So yeah, you can use this time, like while I do the demonstration, to think about which concept you want to start from. Because yes, you kind of need to decide today if you want to start with the block out already. And then for the legs, for the upper and lower leg, I would actually do two different scenarios. So um, you could say, well, I'm just gonna use one cylinder for the entire leg, but this one, um, if I split it up, I have more control over the shapes. So I'll use two instead of one. Just keep it like this for now. I know that the shape is not matching completely, but this is okay. And then I can just duplicate that one because the leg is already closer to the shape of the bottom leg than if I start with the new cylinder. And here as well, we want to sculpt the leg and not the pants. So we need to make everything a bit slimmer. The ankles are really slim down there. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions so far about setting up references? Any step that you missed? Ah, yes. So it is not saved when you go save as tools. So this would be one case where saving as a project could be beneficial because then you don't need to do the same steps again. What you can do if you use the save tool is you could just keep the scale of the grid size in mind, and because these references are already aligned in the center of the, like, if you upload the reference one more time, they are already in the right position, so these ones stay at 0, so it's just remembering this one scale, and otherwise you can just save it as a project too. Yeah, that's a good question. Spit off. And then here with the shoe, yeah, I do see a small problem here with the shoe, which is it is not aligned um, on the ground. So this is where we need to go, like make changes to our 3D sculpt and not stick to the reference in this case, because for 3D characters, it's really important that the feet stay on the ground. In this case, like you can see here, the front part of the shoe is dipping into the ground, and we don't want that. So we would need to turn the shoe a bit and model it in this position. We could, for proportions reasons, we could keep it in this position first, but then in the later steps we would need to rotate the shoe. Definitely. So yeah, maybe I keep it like this at first, but then later we need to align it. What do we do now? Yeah, maybe it's better to do it now, otherwise the shape gets really weird. Maybe I don't cut yet. okay for now. And then if we just also as a recap from the blockout session, we can hit Alt to unlock this one and move the gizmo here to the ankle. So when I rotate, it's rotating from this point. So here in this case with the front view, I will also not follow the perspective of the shoe, but keep it that the shoes are on the ground like this. And then use mirror and weld. Okay. And forward like 2, mirror and weld. And here it's giving us a warning. You can just say yes, mirror it. And here you can see already that the legs are kind of not really 100% in the center. That's okay. And then we need to do the arms. And then also the cone shape up here. That's also part of the blockout. Let's see. We usually want to have one sphere for the shoulder. Use the brush. This is interesting shape. I'm just wondering now that I look at it, if the shoulder point is at the same height as in the reference, and unfortunately not really. So it is high here and there. So if I align it here to the front view, it's not matching the side view. So I'm kind of assuming that she included a bit of perspective. So if I look at the front view, this perspective is less distorted. So I will align the shoulder part to the front view instead of the side view. It's an interesting tweak. And yeah, as you get concepts from character artists, character concept artists, they sometimes like this, you don't notice until you test it out in 3D. So as a character artist, you also then need to inform the concept artist and say, hey, you drew something, but it's just not working out in 3D space. How did you intend it to be? Like, do you want it to be more like this, like that? And then you find a solution that captures the vision of what the concept artist had in mind. And one more. So yeah, one more time, the blockout will be about the body. So actually, maybe we stay away from the cape shape for now. I think that makes more sense. We do the hat. I think that's a nice touch. Or do we? No, let's stick to the body and the hair like it's written in the description. I'm just thinking that for some of these, like for the cape, for example, there are some tools that I want to teach you, but this first session should be really about the forms and not about learning new tools for today. So we'll do the cape at another point in time. I will also write that. I mean, it's written in the description anyways, to look at the body and the hair. Same here. Okay, and then I will, on example of the legs, maybe I will show you how you can get these kind of cylinders and spheres into a better position to match the actual anatomy instead of just having these plain cylinders. So what we can do is we have these cylinders as a base, but then we want to apply more spheres to it that we then bring into shape to mimic the muscles. So we go here and a sphere, scale it down, and then check from both views, because one shape consists of many different shapes that flow into each other. So here for the leg, I really wish I would have my graphic tablet with me, but that one was in the luggage too. So to hear my clicking. Okay, and then with the leg, slide this one up here. And then you just align it so that it looks like the reference in all views. And these kind of extra shapes, they can take quite some time. And for this stage, it also makes sense to look at references for stylized anatomy too, and how the muscles of a human body looks like. Let me quickly open some reference here on the side. Especially also for the face later, this part will be absolutely crucial. So one kind of references that you can use are stylized 3D sculpts, because sometimes it can be quite similar with the Pokemon, really, can be quite difficult to imagine these very weird cartoony shapes in 3D. So there are a couple of great stylized sculpts that you can look at and then see how they created the shapes, even though if this character is completely different to what we are creating. For example, the color we can take some inspiration from, or yes, how stylized these things are. And then here's another one that's also a great reference for the clothing. And here we have some other shapes. So these kind of stylized 3D sculpts are great, especially if you do the faces. This one's a bit too detailed. It's like this. And then in the resources chat, I mentioned that video before, but there's also a video from, oh, that's really loud, but there's also this reference, like this video from this guy, and he also explains his process of blocking out. So he basically also starts with the spheres, manipulates them, brings them into shape, and then refines them as he continues going on. So this guy is also great if you want to get into this topic more and have some resources on the side. Polygon is his name. And then anatomy for sculptors. These people, they do great references, also great books, but these are more on the realistic side. However, everything stylized is always inspired by realism. So if you you have some reference images here, for example, how these different muscles are stitched on the body. So in the stylized world, these kind of shapes are simplified a lot, but looking at what kind of exists in real life is sometimes also really great. So if we have the lower limb, full leg, let's see what we got here. So here they point out the volumes that we have as humans. So here we have the calf muscles and then here the upper leg muscles. So these kind of volumes would be simplified spheres if they shape our character. And then what we can do here too is we can go to Pinterest and then type in stylized character blockout. Let's do that really quick. So yes, this step is very important when you're doing characters to get enough references. Stylized character account type blockout. And then you get kind of these breakdowns, and they are great. Like this is here a more muscular male character in this case, but you see the different polygroups that they use in ZBrush to block out the muscles, to also have a knee pad in here, to have two muscles for muscular characters like this, and you get different views. And of course, if we are sculpting the female character, we would look at female character references. So you can see here the chin is one group, and then the calf muscles don't need to be split into two separate groups because we, as I said, simplify everything down. You can also see this breakdown here where they use just one sphere and bring it into the position. This is also possible so that you don't need, there's no right or wrong as long as you shape the forms of your character. So let's see. I think looking at these and opening up some of them that are similar to your character is the best way to complete this task. To have some of these open on the side. So here for this one, we also have a very simplified shape where they only use one sphere for one leg, and we can do the same if we want to. We can do two of them and then merge them together in the end. Okay, and while we are aligning our character, as I said, we are using the orthographic view, but from time to time we also want to check our model in perspective view without the references. This one. Without the references, and then just see overall if we are missing something, just to see how everything's coming along, and then we can turn that on and the other one off to continue blocking out the character. And yeah, to give you a bit more time to actually complete to work on the task during this session, I will keep this demo short and give you guys the references so that you can start, and then we'll also hop into the different breakout rooms and talk about the last week's assignment. Are there any questions about the blockout in this stage? Okay, then you guys go. Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's really it it's more of personal preference. So right now here these two, they are in the same subtool. So the advantage that I have is I can, for example, align the arms from the side view better and manipulate both of them at the same time. However, if I want to change the shape only of the lower limb and not from the upper limb, I would need to go through the process of auto groups, Control, Shift, click, then click outside to invert the mask, so kind of mask off my mesh, Control, Shift, click to bring it back, and then I can work only on the bottom part, which is easier if I have them as separate subtools. I can just click on them separately and I don't need to do the masking. However, if I would need to adjust the position and like of both of them, I would need to have a bit more of a like aligning multiple subtools at the same time. So it's kind of both versions kind of have a small trade-off. If you are comfortable with the Control, Shift, and clicking, you can do both of them at the same time. If you want to be sure and do less of that, you can have them in separate subtools. And then if you would need to make adjustments to the entire leg, like scaling it or I don't know, rotating it, then you could do that one by one as well. So it's up to you. Yes, and one more important thing is we need to lock in the fingers separately. So we want to have in the end real fingers, not only the hand shape, but real fingers. So in this case, we need to block in the fingers separately on their own. And we will, uh, yes, and we won't do the feet, like the toes. For that, we save ourselves the hassle of creating all the toes and all that. So for the feet, we will keep the block-out shape of the shoes, as the character will never take off his shoes. However, the character will show his fingers, so on the block-out stage, we also need to do the fingers. And for that, it's easiest to create one finger. And the cylinder scale down here. And for the finger, we will do different digits here too. So a bit of a confusing part here in this hand is that the character seems to have only one knuckle right here instead of two. So that is a bit of a challenging interpretation. Yeah, typical challenges of the 3D artist. So we will do a small split here, there. So in this case, we need to differ concept from the reference. Here, auto groups, we want to adjust only this part. So with this select rectangle tool, Control Shift click, Control click, Control Shift click, and then I can use Alt, click on the location icon, bring it into the upright position, and then I can move that one too. So yes, in this case with the fingers, I would go with the slight bend. It's more natural. And then to duplicate the entire finger, I just Control on the arrow, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and now all of these fingers are completely the same size. So in reality, they differ a bit in size, so you can scale them a bit. And that one too. Maybe in this case, to have more control over the fingers and save us the time of Control Shift and clicking them all the time, I can use the duplicate button here and have them as separate subtools for now. I think that would make it a bit easier to block them out. Duplicate. And here we can also align like the length of the fingers. So right now they like in this here we also need to look get references of the hand. And let me pull that up for you. So type in stylized hands blockout. And see which one is a good example. This one maybe. This one too. So yeah, we see that the hands are positioned in an arch. So the fingers don't have the same length, and the knuckles also don't have the same position. So they form some sort of arch where the pinky and the smallest finger, they kind of like they're a bit higher up. And then part of your job, here you can see the arch pretty well, like this. And then even though this is a realistic reference, these principles apply to our project here too. And since the fingers and the hands in general will be more of a challenge, I would say since next week we will concern ourselves with the head shape. If you can't manage to finish the blockout of the hands in this week, you can also move the hands to next week and keep them as a blob for now, and then do the fingers next time, because it might take a lot of time to finish the blockout already, so we can do the hands next time together with the head shape. Maybe that's also a bit easier to do. Yeah. Okay, so the task, the body. You can use blobs for the hands, you can use fingers if you want to do that already. There are some kind of pitfalls in the concept, like there is no perfect symmetry in this concept, or the feet are kind of drawn in position instead of in the, like, without perspective on. However, this concept will still be, yeah, we can still work with that, because these kind of challenges will happen all the time if we get a concept. So that's the best time to learn how to navigate with them. So yeah, you guys can start, and I'll jump to you into the breakout rooms. You can take a 5-minute break beforehand. I will get something to drink. Then you guys enjoy the blockout process, and see you in the breakout rooms. Bye bye.